Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about my least favorite campaigns in Total War Warhammer 3. This is not about which Legendary Lords or which campaigns are objectively the worst, but rather which campaigns I personally dislike the most in Warhammer 3. Some people might be surprised by some of the choices on this list, but I will explain my reasoning. At number 5, we have Karl Franz, the Empire in general. I think all Imperial Legendary Lords are pretty awful, but I do certainly think that Karl Franz has the worst situation of all of them. Now, Karl Franz is pretty decent as a Legendary Lord when we're looking at his faction effects, his Lord skill lines, etc. But the problem is, he is a Legendary Lord of the Empire, and he has to deal with Imperial Authority. And Imperial Authority is just one of the most awful mechanics in the entire game in general. You don't really feel like you're trying to protect the entire empire. You don't really feel like you're controlling the entire empire or influencing it or politicking in it. You feel like you're the janitor cleaning up the mess for everyone else. That's kind of the problem in Karl Franz's campaign, the big problem in his campaign. And then there's more. Beyond the issues that Imperial Authority create, and the issue with Imperial Authority is that not only do you have to care to some extent about increasing it, you don't really care about the Empire, you just care about authority. That there's a difference between the two of them, and that you can cheese Imperial Authority to gain a lot of it and not give a damn if half the Empire or 90% of the Empire is a burning ruin. And the thing about confederations with other Imperial factions is that it consumes a lot of Imperial Authority, and most of the time you're not really going to gain a lot of it. Now, obviously, if you're playing Karl Franz and you confederate Gelt, that is a different discussion, but usually you're going to get one province, if even that, maybe one or two settlements that won't necessarily be very well developed either. The problem for the Empire is while they have a decent economy, decent growth, you name it, they're not really great in that respect either. They're good, but they're not like, ooh, they're astounding, they're amazing. No. And the issue is, you need an army to win sieges as the Empire pretty early on, because siege battles, settlement battles are going to be the most important thing you're going to be dealing with in a campaign. And the issue is that this basically pushes you down the path of getting archers and then getting crossbowmen, which isn't a fun playstyle. It's a playstyle that works, it's the best playstyle you could go for, and it will win you field battles and siege battles, but it isn't fun just parking your entire range army outside of a settlement walls and killing everyone in sight. But your infantry line early on until you get into greatswords is just not great. Your cavalry line is good, but the problem is it's obviously limited in usefulness early on or throughout the entire campaign because you do need units to be able to win sieges, and you don't get artillery, any kind of artillery, until tier 3, and the artillery you want, which are great cannons and Hellstorm rocket batteries, are tier 4. Sure, you could take Nuln and cheese it and get artillery that way, but here's the thing: either this campaign is incredibly frustrating because you're incredibly limited in your army roster and by Imperial Authority, or it's a complete utter joke. The reason I say it's a joke is because you can cheese this system. It's easier to do as Gelt than Franz, but what you do is you declare war on Nuln, and you take one of their minor settlements, or both of their minor settlements, so Wissenberg specifically, and then you sell it to Averheim or Gelt. Then next turn, you're going to get the event to force them to give it back. You keep doing this again and again and again. Now, of course, Nuln is going to recruit an army over here, so you're probably going to just spend, 20, 30 turns of your campaign just after dealing with Reichland. All you're really going to be doing in this campaign is just taking a settlement, giving it back, taking a settlement, giving it back, taking a settlement, giving it back, again and again and again, until you get 30 Imperial Authority. The rest of the Empire burns, and you are going to get a lot of money from that. You're going to get a lot of Imperial Authority for that. And that will allow you to confederate other factions and keep this meter filled. It isn't a great mechanic in any circumstance to deal with. Now, people say, why would you use that? To which I reply, it's the best decision you can make in your campaign, because it means you're not running around like a headless chicken trying to clean up after all of these minor factions that tend to get wiped out or suffer significantly. You lose Imperial Authority when they get wiped out, you lose Imperial Authority when their provincial capital gets taken over. So not a great situation to have to deal with, not a fun campaign, not a well-designed campaign. At number 4, we have Taurox the Brass Bull, and in general, the Beastman. Now, don't get me wrong, I like Taurox as a legendary lord. I like his mechanics. The problem I have are with the Beastmen. To explain what the issue is to understand how the Beastmen work. So the Beastmen can only have one army until they do a Ritual of Ruination rank 2. Now, what's annoying by that is that you need to get a certain level of Marks of Ruination. And there's a lot of settlements to deal with and a lot of fights to have in order to succeed in that. And even with the second army, you're just going to fill it up with basically garbage of Ungor Raiders and Ungor herds, or Ungor Spearmen specifically, Ungor Spearmen herds, which aren't really good units. I mean, the Chaos Dwarves have unit caps, but the Chaos Dwarves also have Hobgoblins. You have the Beastmen trash to fill up your armies early on in a campaign. So what this leads to is a situation where the early game for a Beastman is always, to some degree or another, frustrating, challenging, if you will. Though not necessarily so, but more like frustrating. In Taurox's case, he has to deal with Silostra, Alifanar, potentially the Sisters of Twilight as well. And they're all pretty powerful factions. Well, Silostra not so much, but Alifanar and the Sisters absolutely so. Let's not even talk about Kateb or the never-ending tide of Dark Elves that are going to be coming from the north. No one really likes the Beastmen. There's no faction in the game that says, oh, I really like getting along with the Beastmen. Not even Chaos likes the Beastmen in any real way, shape, or form. So that means your early game ends up being fairly frustrating, whereas your late game, you're just steamrolling the map. Because once you get the armies, once you get the unit capacity, you are a pretty powerful race. You are a pretty powerful faction, and you steamroll the map. But that's not really great campaign design. I mean, it made sense in Warhammer 2, but Warhammer 3 campaigns are just faster paced. You want to get things done as quickly as possible in as few turns as possible. And especially with Taurox, this doesn't work well because Taurox can fight a lot of battles very quickly, but he's just overcommitting himself in that situation. Like, you want to go on a rampage, you don't want to stop, but you only have one army to do so. That's also not really going to have a lot of good units, because what you want to do with all the dread you're collecting is you don't want to spend it on the unit caps. You want to spend it on over here, or you want to get lords and heroes, legendary lords. But again, if you do that, if you manage that, and it's certainly very doable, you're just going to steamroll all of your opponents. And that's what I dislike about this campaign design. It's a campaign that is frustrating, annoying, even difficult in the early game, but it's a complete steamroll in the late game. Too much. There's too much of an imbalance between the early game and the late game. Some of the best campaigns, sure, you become a powerful faction in the late game, but you're not just like feeling like you're bashing your head against a brick wall in the early game either. Like, look at Alifanar, for instance, or Drazov, or some other really great campaigns. Their early game is easy, because like Alifanar just has to deal with the Dark Elves. Yes, he's vulnerable against Silostra. That is certainly a problem he's going to have to deal with in his campaign. But his early game is the easiest part of his campaign. It's the mid game when Helbron, Malekith, Be'lakor, Taurox start showing up that things get interesting, but you do have the armies to deal with that. Whereas with Taurox, it's really the early game portion that's brutal, and then the mid-late game are just pathetically easy to deal with in a campaign. And that, to me, is not great campaign design. And number 3 is Lord Mazdamundi of the Lizardmen. The Lizardmen are an okay race, though they're certainly not the most exciting race to play in the game at the moment. How Creative Assembly makes dinosaurs, or dinosaurs riding dinosaurs, boring is in some ways beyond me, but I've always thought that the Lizardmen were a fairly boring race to play in Total War Warhammer ever since they were introduced in Warhammer 2. In fact, even though I played a lot of Warhammer 2, I never really bothered in that game with the full Lizardmen campaign. That was just my personal impression of them. Now, there are some good Lizardmen campaigns out there, like Gorok is always fun because of the nuclear weapon that is Lord Croak. The Cult of Sotek has its own interesting things going for it. Oxyatl has one of the better campaigns. Nakai is an interesting Horde army campaign. And Krokar isn't too bad. But Mazdamundi is just like awful. He has all of the downsides of the Lizardman and none of the benefits. He's just boring. As a legendary lord with his special skill line, like, you don't even have a special skill line with him. Oh, it's like you can get the banishment spell and you can get the ruination of cities. It's like not really great magical ability for a guy who's supposed to be like this force of nature that just completely obliterates anyone that stands in his path. Like, someone mentioned this to me when Mazdamundi was holding back the Skaven Wound from destroying the world. It took the gods of chaos working against him to actually kill him. That's how powerful he is. And like in the game, he is not, that strength is not represented at all. It would be fun playing a legendary lord that was more designed like Ikaclaw, because you look at Ikaclaw, for all the issues he has in his campaign, and they do exist in his terms of his starting position, like Ikaclaw always has the ability to just nuke the planet. Mazdamundi should also have that ability. That's where I stand on that. Like, work for a spell and then unleash it to deliver devastation to your enemies. It would be a much better campaign mechanic. Faction effect-wise, you get the construction cost benefit for a building that you really don't care about all that much, and a right cost of minus 30%. Right cost minus 30%, okay, that's decent enough, right? Because you can get the right to primeval glory. But reducing the right costs is just not really too significant, I would argue, as a benefit. And the construction cost benefit, let's just take a look at what the Star Chamber is. It's 1,500 with that discount. Paying 3,000 otherwise, yeah, that's not really too big of a deal. And regardless, you wouldn't really bother with this too much, I would argue, in your campaign. I mean, you could get a lot of them, I suppose, but it's just like a meaningless benefit in a lot of ways. So you're looking at a legendary lord that's fairly generic, doesn't have really anything going for him except that Temple Guard benefit, and as well as some of his magic spells. I mean, look at Mazdamundi. He's so bored himself that he's asleep on his character screen. That's how bad the situation is with him. You can have a lot of fun in some Lizardman campaigns, just don't touch Mazdamundi's, because on top of that, you also have a rough starting position because you're at war with the Slaaneshi faction here, and they have a Keeper over here that is going to be a problem to deal with. Like, this guy can take down your entire army if you're not careful enough. And then you have Skeggi, and Skeggi are also a lot more dangerous than one might realize as well. It is a bit bizarre that you do start a war with Skeggi, because Skeggi in the lore is supposed to be so afraid of the Lizardmen that they just kind of keep quiet and try and avoid the tension from the Lizardmen. Maybe Mazdamundi declared war on them. And here's the thing, this is another campaign where the early game is the difficult part. Once you overcome it, you're just steamrolling. Like, there's a reason why Mazdamundi, if he wins over this entire province when controlled by the AI, or over this entire area, becomes one of the strongest factions in the game, because no one's going to challenge him. You start with the non-aggression pact to Morathi. She's not really going to bother you in her campaign, and you don't want her to bother you. In fact, you might want to take some of the territory here and sell it to her so that she just leaves you the heck alone, really. I mean, it's kind of a funny duo that Mazdamundi's campaign is so ridiculous that you can literally outline Morathi, which should be a major no-go in a Lizardman campaign, just, well, for many, many lore reasons. So this is a campaign that doesn't make sense from a lore perspective. This is a campaign that doesn't make sense from a gameplay perspective. It's boring, it's dull, and it's completely forgettable. And it's quite a shame, really, because there would be a lot of potential with Mazdamundi, but that potential was never realized in Total War Warhammer, either 2 or 3. At number 2, we have the Wood Elves. Not just Orion, though I think he certainly is the worst campaign in this respect, but the Wood Elves in general. What I dislike about the Wood Elves is the way their campaigns are structured. They can be fun early on. Who doesn't like unleashing a flying artillery piece in the Sisters of Twilight, or bring death and destruction with Durfu on the campaign map, or what Draika does, which is annihilate everyone that stands in their path regardless of their strength. But while that's certainly fun, it quickly becomes boring. And Orion doesn't even have that aspect going for him, because his army is not Draika or Durfu or the Sisters of Twilight, so his situation is just going to be pretty boring from the very beginning of the campaign, which is not the great dynamic to have. It's not that the Wood Elf campaigns are difficult, far from it. They're very, very easy to deal with, and that's the problem that I have with those campaigns is that they are ridiculously easy and boring as a result of it. It's not fun when you're just steamrolling all of your opponents without any kind of challenge, and Orion is the worst example of this because he gets free armies. They haven't changed them yet. I think they will change them potentially in 3.1. When I look at 3.1 patch notes, they just put in a lot of minor fixes. Yes, some rebalancing for multiplayer, all that kind of stuff, but they really didn't touch the lord effects, the faction effects, the races that already exist in the game. We'll see what 3.1 brings whenever that comes out, maybe later this month at some point or another, and hopefully they will change Orion. But the dynamic that exists in all Wood Elven campaigns is honestly not really appealing to me personally, because yes, you can have some fun early on, but once you start steamrolling, you steamroll, and no one's really going to challenge you at any point in time. And that's the issue. I think like when you're looking at a video game in general, you want to have engagement or engaging gameplay. It's not engaging gameplay if you're steamrolling someone. It's also not engaging gameplay if you have a brutal challenge every single corner. That's the issue in some campaigns. In this kind of situation, it's like it's too far on the other side on any difficulty in the game. I mean, the only challenge you're going to encounter as Orion is just taking Paravon early on because it's a tier 3 settlement, but they only have one army that's over here, so if you rush it, if you just go for it very, very quickly, then you absolutely will be able to just put them under siege, and if they come out to attack you, you can defeat their army on the field of battle. So not really a great campaign dynamic to deal with over there from the very start. It's also annoying in Orion's campaign that you can't recruit units early on. It's kind of an issue in all with elf campaigns, but like just the territory over here is in itself not too great to deal with. In terms of my least favorite campaign in Total War Warhammer 3 at the very moment, it is Archaon the Ever-Chosen. Archaon is a great legendary lord. He's got great campaign mechanics. He's got a great faction. He's got a great race. He's got a great army. So why is his campaign at the top of this list? Why are campaigns that have broken mechanics not at the top? Well, simply because this campaign is boring as dirt, and it just isn't really worth playing at the moment. And I don't think any of the Warriors of Chaos are really worth playing. I mean, Festus and Valkia to a certain extent, maybe Azazel, sure, because at least you have some level of challenge in those campaigns, though not really. You're just going to steamroll everyone. This is an issue in every single Warriors of Chaos campaign. In some, you might have an early game challenge, like Grimgor and Colex, or the Dark Elves and Valkias, but as Archaon, you have absolutely no challenge in the entire campaign. If there is a challenge that you encounter, a challenging situation, is because your armies are too spread out and you threw too little against too much. Like, let's say you throw an army against Grimgor and it's just not enough to overcome him. But you're not going to lose to Grimgor. You're never at risk of losing a campaign as the Warriors of Chaos at any point, because the Dark Fortresses themselves are so substantial and so powerful that no army attacking them will be able to take them easily. And look at Archaon's situation. His Dark Fortress in the Blood Marshes is right in this pocket over here. I wish luck to anyone attacking this, because I've dealt with Archaon. I've fought campaigns against Archaon, and I can tell you it is an absolute nightmare. Or not necessarily a nightmare, but really, really annoying to have to cover all of this territory just to attack him to wipe him out. You're just wasting so much time to do so. And that means Archaon is unbeatable in his campaign in every way that counts. And on top of that situation, all of the factions he's going to deal with in his campaign from the very start are either minor factions or, you know, the exception is Boris Ursus. But you're stronger than Boris Ursus. You have a Hell Cannon. You have a Regiment of Renown. You're just going to beat the crap out of him, vassalize, and then no one's going to be able to stand in your way. And furthermore, the best way to play this campaign is take over the entire Northern Chaos Waste, vassalize factions along the way, or have a few but powerful vassals that you give a lot of this territory to, and then just get Sigvald, Valkia, eventually get the Zazel, Kolek, etc., and then unleash your mighty powerful armies and legendary lords on everyone on the campaign map. And no one will be able to stop you. They won't even be able to try to stop you, because you'll just be far stronger than they will. So it's a bad campaign dynamic because it's just really tedious and boring. It's tedious because you have a lot of ground to cover. The distances in Northern Chaosways are significant distances, but every time you encounter a faction, you just wipe them out with ease. There's no battle. You might go in Archaon's campaign throughout all of it, and the only battles you might fight are your initial battle over here, and maybe not even that, depends on the difficulty you're playing, and maybe your quest battles, and even those not necessarily, because you can get a mod that allows you to out-resolve those. Like, this is a case where you just steamroll everyone, and there's no point, at no point do you encounter a genuine challenge that can stop you. Maybe a secondary army that isn't well developed may encounter a challenge, but your main army is going to be unbreakable, it's going to be unbeatable, and you're just going to steamroll everyone and everything. And you also get the annoyance of having to manage all of the vassals, because you want a lot of vassals as Archaon because of the research rate, the diplomatic benefits, the souls benefit. It isn't a fun experience to deal with Archaon's campaign on any level. Again, great lord, great race, great faction effects. Absolutely, undeniably so. Archaon is a really powerful lord in the game, but really boring and tedious campaign. I don't feel challenged in any way. I don't feel excited. I don't really feel like I'm playing the bringer of the end times who's looking to unify the forces of chaos and then fight a major war with the forces of order, because the forces of order in the Empire are pretty damn pathetic, to be honest. Now, maybe things will get better if the Empire is reworked and made more substantial, but until that point, Archaon's campaign is and will remain one of the worst to play, from my perspective. I've played this campaign. I can tell you it was never really that fun. Like, the excitement wears out pretty quickly.